Hi, everyone. So, a recent Gallup study linked managers with employee engagement. So effective managers can actually improve employee engagement and reduce turnover. At Microsoft, we also believe that managers play a large role in culture. And we're really relying on our managers to drive this cultural change that we're in the midst of right now and infuse this new culture within the organization. One of our culture attributes is customer obsession. And in HR, managers are one of our biggest customers. And so it's up to HR to really provide managers with the tools and guidance that they can use to really improve engagement. And so in order to do that, we need to understand our managers. We need to understand what's important to them. We need to understand what challenges they have. And we also need to be able to provide good guidance to them on different types of behaviors that can impact engagement. So how can we measure the impact of managers? And of course, the first thing we do is turn to data. So most companies have access to basic demographic data. This data can provide you information on how many managers you have, what their average number of direct reports are, where they're located across the globe. But it does little to provide you information on sentiment and what managers really need to be successful and what employees are looking for their managers. So to understand managers at a deeper level, we turn to surveys and we turn to sentiment. At Microsoft, we have an annual engagement survey that we use that really focuses on the employee experience. It also will focus on managers and the work groups that teams are part of. We've also used another tool, which is a global manager survey, and this is really from the manager perspective and what managers are looking for. It will give an indication as to their roles and prior experiences. And although this data is also very insightful, it's missing a key aspect, and it's really about those behaviors that can really impact how your employees are experiencing in their day-to-day jobs. So with workplace analytics, we're looking to take our insights to the next level. And I'm going to hand it over to Ryan, who's going to talk a little bit more about workplace analytics.
Thanks, Dawn. Yeah, so it's great to be here. I am general manager inside the Office 365 product organization building the workplace analytics product. I also was, until 18 months ago, I was the founder and CEO of a company called Volumetrics that was an early people analytics company doing the same sort of stuff we do now with behavioral data. And now we were acquired by Microsoft 18 months ago and now building this capability out at a much greater scale. So excited to tell you a little bit about it. We're really about knowledge workers, right? Nothing on this slide you don't already know. There's more and more knowledge workers in the world every day. Most other types of jobs, task workers, routine work, et cetera, have kind of leveled out in the world. And this is a bit of a challenge for companies trying to find new ways to be more productive. But in task work, you can kind of measure productivity fairly effectively. Right? If you have a barista, you know how many cups of coffee they make in an hour, et cetera. But for knowledge work, it's really notoriously difficult to actually quantify what productivity looks like. You can do it in sales organizations, who sells the most. But engineering, marketing, why can some employees go home earlier than all their peers yet produce much better work? It's really hard to quantify that. So that's what we do. And we have this big idea that inside the data, basically the digital exhaust that comes off of all of the tools that knowledge workers use all day to do their jobs, there's the signal. If you analyze that in the right way, if you certainly account for privacy in the right way, confidentiality, security, et cetera, there's so much in there that you can learn about how work actually works, right? And so we were doing this as a startup that I led with dozens of companies, kind of one at a time, looking at the data in their email server, looking at the meeting calendar, looking at all these other signals. With Microsoft, the amazing opportunity in front of us is we have this thing called Office 365, which is this cloud version of all your Office applications. We kind of created it as a company in order to have a better software as a service offering and change our business model. But as a byproduct, the way I think about it is what we created was the largest database ever built for how people do work. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of petabytes of data growing like crazy, tens of millions of people using these applications every day. So you think about what can we learn if we look at that in the right way, it's really quite staggering. So a little bit about how it works. We start with email and meeting calendar. That's the primary data sources we use that we find are most broadly applicable across large organizations. We'll add other data sets, Skype and chats and phones and stuff over time. But email and calendar alone in a large organization, we've found accounts for over 20 hours a week of the average worker's time. So that's a really strong signal. If you're a manager or more senior than that, or you are in a collaborative function like sales or marketing, it'll account for 30 to 70 hours of your time. So you think about, wow, what can we do if we understand very granularly where 20 to 60 hours of time goes in terms of who you're engaging with across different teams, maybe even outside the company, what customers or suppliers are getting the most time, how people's networks are evolving, et cetera. Quite a lot you can do. So for this talk, we want to talk about managers, right? And Dawn, in a moment, will talk about how this has been used inside Microsoft and some of the insights that have come out on manager behaviors inside Microsoft. But I'll talk about it a little bit more in general, what we've seen across some different customers that we work with. We take all those emails and meetings and all those data points, and we turn them into a set of behavioral metrics, right? So think about things like how much time is a manager spending in one-on-ones with their direct reports, right? We can quantify that across tens of thousands of people, across years of data, right? We can quantify the size of networks, et cetera. So here are a set of categories that we've developed that sort of get at some of the things around how managers work, right? How accessible is a manager? How much are they working to actually enable and train their employees? Are they actually empowering folks and putting them in front of more senior leadership on a regular basis, or do they look like they're micromanaging, et cetera? Are they balancing workloads evenly across teams? A number of different categories that we look at. And so rather than, we have a product that churns out all these metrics, and then companies and teams of analysts can use them to draw whatever conclusions make sense to them. But what we found is rather than applying just human judgment alone, it comes to life when you take an outcome variable of some kind of additional data set, in this case, employee engagement surveys, and you do the correlation analysis. So you begin to understand, what is it behaviorally that differentiates managers of teams that are highly engaged versus managers of teams that are not, right? It's pretty cool stuff. So some of the stuff we found, I'll just give you, there's a couple insights I'll go a little bit deep on, and then a couple at a high level, and then I'll turn it back to Dawn to talk about Microsoft. But this is with some of our customers. We've seen patterns like this, where one metric we have approximates the average work week of a person, right? So we look at sort of first and last email or meeting of the day, each day, and look at that across many weeks of data and get a rough approximation of people kind of seem to be active 20 hours a week, 50 hours a week, whatever it may be. Imperfect metric, but directionally gives a good sense of level of engagement or activity per week. So what we did here, we separated the managers into quartiles based on high or low active work week hours. And then we looked at whether or not that manager behavior impacted their teams. And so two findings. One, if you're an employee reporting to a manager who's in that top bucket, that top quartile of long working hours, you're actually 9% more engaged than the average. And you work 19% more hours. So it's interesting, right? So if your manager works hard, you work hard and you're happier. This is wonderful news, simple, case closed, right? Everybody just needs to somehow make managers work harder and everything works. But of course, it's not quite that simple. There is a point at which the hours get to a certain level, and in particular, we can also look at how much time is being spent sort of after 6 p.m. or on weekends or wherever is outside your normal work shift. Once that hits a certain tipping point, it falls off a cliff, right? And all of a sudden, the employees are 1.6 times more likely to be disengaged, right? So there's some sweet spot in there that we identified. Another one has to do with networks. If there's one thing we've found that is universally true across all the companies that we work with, it's that large networks, by which I mean the number of people you regularly interact with inside your own company, large networks are always heavily correlated with positive performance outcomes, be it sales, be it engagement, be it performance ratings. It is always true to date. So we looked at this, and it played out here as well. So if you're reporting to a manager who has a large network in the top quartile, you're going to be 7% more engaged on average at these companies. More importantly, you're going to have an 85% larger network than people reporting to an average networked manager. So if you think about what I just said, if it's true, if you believe that large networks are really meaningful when it comes to positive outcomes, working for a manager with a large network is a really good way to get there. Or rather, from a company's perspective, making sure your managers have lots of opportunities to build large networks is really critical for companies to invest in. The flip side of it is also further reinforces the point that if you work for a manager who has a smaller network than you, you're much more likely to be disengaged, right? And anecdotally, this kind of makes sense. If you think of part of a manager's job is to provide connectivity to broader parts of the organization and broader context, if you work for a manager that isn't able to do that because they simply don't have the relationships, it's pretty uninspiring, right? And many employees, based on sort of anecdotal and qualitative follow-ups, just felt like their manager was needless overhead. So interesting insights there. A couple other things, is kind of more of a laundry list. Workload balancing is interesting. Again, pretty intuitive, but once you put numbers on it, it starts to have some teeth, and you can start to use it to drive some change. If you there's a lot of volatility across your peers in terms of how long their average work week is. People are more likely to be disengaged, right? Just, I don't want to see all my peers going home early and I've got more work to do, another few hours of work to do. Coaching and career development both have to do with how much time managers actually spend in one-on-ones with employees. The net of it is it's important for managers to spend time in one-on-ones and to make sure they have development opportunities. And then engagement, right? There's some really cool stuff being done around how engagement sort of virally traverses across organizations. And if you report to a manager who themselves is disengaged, you're twice as likely to be disengaged. So again, the kind of insights that are going to be different for every company, but once you have numbers on them, you can start to roll them into all kinds of change programs, coaching programs, and really start to make a difference. So to that end, let me have Don tell you what's been done within Microsoft.
So yeah, as Ryan said, every company has a unique culture. And so even though he talked about some great insights that we've been able to glean with other companies, we wanted to take workplace analytics KPIs and correlate them with our own engagement surveys. So one of the findings that we have is that there's a connection between the manager's network and the employee's network, okay? And that managers that have larger network actually have employees that feel that, that their managers are more effective, okay? And if you think about that, managers that have larger networks can also introduce their employees to many people around the company. And that really plays into another one of our cultural attributes, which is to work as one. We want to make sure that people are really working across the company in one united way. Some of the other benefits that we see are that employees that continue to have internal network growth actually intend to stay at Microsoft longer. So the number one reason why people leave Microsoft is for career development opportunities. If you're an employee that has a large network, you have a lot of people that you can reach out to when you're ready for your next career goal, as opposed to starting to look externally. And then lastly, employees that have a larger network actually feel a sense of belonging, particularly with new employees. So we want managers to introduce their employees to different people across the company. We want them to go out, grab a coffee, grow their network. It's going to be beneficial not just for the employee, but for the team and for the company. We also find that that there's a large importance in the amount of time that managers spend with their employees. We're not just talking about communication, but we're really talking about building a relationship and developing trust, and really having managers take the time to understand what their employees need. The more one-on-one time that managers spend with their employees, the more that employees feel that their contributions are appreciated. They also feel like the managers can provide feedback to the employees, and the employees will actually listen to that feedback and take action to improve their performance. In addition, managers can help employees meet their career goals. So some of the other findings that we saw, managers, they can't do it all. Okay, so there's a trade-off between the amount of time for collaboration and the amount of time that you take to do your individual contributor work. And that's why it's really important for companies to communicate what the role of and the expectation of the managers. It's something that we're working on right now at Microsoft, is to really define that role of the manager and be very clear about what we expect. It might not be the same for every profession and every role that you're in. There is definitely a correlation between the measurable aspects of collaboration and inclusion. Okay, in order to create a diverse workforce, you need to drive a culture of inclusion. It will not be successful without that. Maxine talked about that this morning. This next one is very near and dear to my heart, because I have always felt that employees should have access to their managers. It's really nice that we can finally validate some of this with data. On Fridays, I try to block my schedule every Friday so that people on my team can come to my office, they can talk to me about their projects, they can just bounce ideas off. What they don't realize is they're actually helping to make me smarter. And I love that. So it's something that I've often believed in over the years. And as I said, it's great to be able to validate this. And then finally, work-life balance. So you have to think about how many hours you as a manager are working outside of business hours. Can you imagine as an employee waking up every Saturday morning to an inbox full of emails, feeling like you need to respond to your manager right away? Okay, so think about that. Sometimes you might want to time those emails a little differently so that maybe they go and are sent during business hours. It really could have an impact on the employee's perception of their balance. So now that we have these insights, what are we doing and how are we getting these into the hands of HR and managers to take action? Well, one of the ways we're doing this is through manager snack emails. Our head of HR, she's started to send out these emails about once a quarter, and they provide helpful tips and tricks to managers that they can help infuse into their working relationship with their employees. To get these insights in the hands of HR, we're leveraging our social network, our internal social network, Yammer, and we're posting them with this hashtag, data-driven HR. That way HR can go and search on this hashtag and get some really helpful tips that they can use when they're coaching managers. But lastly, this is just the beginning. I mean, think about if you're able to get a notification on your phone that you haven't met or emailed anyone outside of your internal network in over a month, and all of a sudden you're served up different people around the organization that have similar roles to you that you could meet with. Okay, that is how we're empowering managers to really take action on these insights. So as I leave you with something, and you leave today, think about what data do you have available to you, and how can you leverage these data to create meaningful insights, and then how can you operationalize these insights to empower your managers to really impact engagement and manager effectiveness.
So much, guys. Well, thank you, first of all, for such a fabulous, in-depth dive into what Microsoft's doing. I think this panel fits in wonderfully to where we are at this point in the conference to really start, going beyond some of the things that apply, more generally, or whether, discussing whether or not they apply, to really understanding how this stuff gets done inside an organization, how you can use some of these tools and techniques. So I want to pick up on that kind of idea and really try to delve a little bit deeper into how you did it and what you do and some of the things you've learned through the process. But let me start off by asking, one question that's been on my mind a little bit, especially in light of the discussions we've already had this morning, which is, we're talking about people analytics as a way to sort of test your intuitions and show whether or not they really, are right or not. And I'm curious about the extent to which you have found things that are surprising in the work that you've been doing. Are these things that you didn't anticipate? Can you think of a couple of examples that really went against the intuitions, the guts that we know are important? And maybe people analytics is just about validating what we already think and communicating that and using it as numbers as persuasion, or is it actually demonstrating, finding some things that you didn't anticipate?
Sure, yeah, I can start, yeah. Sometimes it's both. One case study we talk about a lot, as I alluded to, sales is a ripe organization where you do have a clear productivity metric that you can use as your variable to correlate against. We've had lots of counterintuitive findings there around what differentiates top performing salespeople. Almost always they spend more time with customers, sure. Almost always they have broader internal networks. That's actually not intuitive to a lot of sales leaders, but it makes sense when you say, well, they need to be able to bring the right specialists, they need to have the right context from the product team, they need to be able to get the executive to fly out to close the deal on the right day. Like, that helps. But one thing that's been interesting is we've seen a real difference between different organizations around breadth versus depth. So for some organizations, it turns out the best salespeople, they may have 20 assigned accounts, but they only talk to 5 of them. And they invest all their time in those 5, and they build, call it 10 relationships with different people in each one of them. And they're significantly more effective than their peers who talk to all 20 of their accounts and only have 2 relationships at each one of them. And that's the kind of thing where even if you asked the successful salespeople, what do you do differently? They have no idea what they do differently. But all of a sudden you find that, and you can roll that out immediately, and everybody wants to sell more, and they can act on it, and it changes quickly.
So I want to hear some more about this, but
Yeah.
it actually relates to a question that came in while you were speaking from the audience, that somebody asked, do you actually capture strong versus weak ties in the network analyses that you're doing, as well as just the range of somebody's ties? So it sounds like the answer there is yes.
We do, yeah, we're experimenting. I mean, it's such a broad and rich data set across all these collaboration sources, so it's a little bit of drawing the boundaries of how should we define a strong tie and how should we define a weak tie, and how frequent do you need to interact and how intimate does it need to be, et cetera. But we're doing a lot of stuff to try to solve that. Most of the stuff we do tends to be more strong tie based, right. But it's all there.
Right. And inside Microsoft?
Inside Microsoft, I think one of the more surprising findings that we had was managers that have larger networks, actually there isn't a correlation between the time to fill their jobs. Okay, and so we were hoping that, if managers had bigger networks, it would be easier for them to find people for their open roles, and there'd be a shorter time to fill. And actually, that's not the case.
And do you look at the strong versus weak ties piece of that? Because there's a lot of research literature that says it depends on what kind of ties you have, right? So that would maybe be a way.
So
to
yes, push it's kind of a drill down analysis that we could look at. Yeah.
So what's great about the insights that you were describing is so many of them lead to follow-on questions,
Absolutely.
right? And additional research that you need to do to actually understand what's really going on.
And that's what's so fascinating about this data set is I feel like it's so new for us that it does generate so many questions. And as I say, there's always more work for us to do than we possibly have the resources to do it. And so we have to prioritize and make sure that the work that we're going after is something that we would actually take action on.
Right.
Okay, and so that's kind of how we prioritize on our team. How is it linked to the HR strategy? And if we can be assured that depending on what we find, we would actually take action, that would be a priority for us.
And that leads directly to my next set of questions, because I think a lot of folks are very interested to learn more about the process, like what actually goes into doing this kind of work, right? So you found a set of things that may or may not apply to other organizations, but how do other organizations do this for themselves, right? So you were starting to touch on it. How much time has this taken you? What kind of resources have you put to it? What has gone into sort of the investment of getting this to the point that you now have a set of findings that you can circulate? I
mean, I think in the beginning, it was really around working with Ryan's team to get the product to a point where it could scale to Microsoft, okay? Because, at Microsoft, we created Outlook. We use Outlook in ways that companies probably have never even imagined, okay? And I think it was surprising for Ryan's team as to exactly how we really do use Outlook. And so I would say for the first probably 6 months to almost a year, it was just us kind of getting through that whole process. And then once we got that down, we're actually able to crank out the insights pretty quickly, okay? So we don't have a huge team of people working
How many people?
this. Actually, we have one person that owns our data model, and she is very integral to this. And then we have other people that work with her to really, they're the ones asking the deep questions. They partner together to get this to happen. So it's not like you're looking at a huge team of people that need to work on this, but we do happen to have this model that we're able to take the KPIs from workplace analytics and correlate it with our engagement survey or performance or whatever we're correlating with.
Right, so you have some in-house expertise on how to do the stuff that's enabling you to be much more efficient about it.
And that's what we find is, I think fast forward a couple years, companies will have greater capabilities for using this particular set of data, but it's a very messy data set that is still a lot to be learned about how to properly clean it, how to define different metrics that are important, et cetera. So we find that we usually have to help companies get off the ground and figure out what is good, what is bad, how do I do something with this. It can easily turn into a science project otherwise, of just endless digging and no answer in sight. But typically, for most companies, they can get this, they can get the data in their hands within a few weeks, and then you can get to insight, depending on what you want to do with it, you can get to insight within a few weeks after that. Mm-hmm. And then it's a question of how deep. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
if you get the right people to talk to.
That's right.
Right. Let me ask you an important question that I'm sure some folks are wondering about, which is privacy, or maybe you're wondering about privacy, but I wonder about privacy. So how do you think about that? What have you learned about it? What are the constraints, both in your clients and at Microsoft?
I'll start. I mean, we take privacy very, very seriously at Microsoft. And I didn't say this when I was presenting, but the data that was presented today is really US engineering-based employees, okay? And so we've started with our US-based employees because of the privacy laws outside the US, okay? And they're stricter. And but we wanted to see and play with this type of technology. Ryan's team, they've been working really hard and working particularly outside the US, and he can talk about the progress that we've been making. But we also are very transparent with our employees. We wrote an article that was posted on our internal intranet to basically explain that we were going to leverage this type of technology to start gathering insights. And so at that point, employees could raise their hand and say, hey, wait a second, I don't feel comfortable with this. But we do want employees to know what we're doing.
Yeah, I've spent an unfortunate amount of my life in the last 5 years talking to privacy lawyers around the world. I highly recommend that to all of you. It is important. It's very important. And what we have found, certainly there are harder conversations in Europe and in certain parts of the world just around who actually owns that data, what's actually okay, what's not okay. But we work with companies to help them scope what they want to do with it. That's usually the concern is, well, there's a lot of bad things you could do if you pulled all that data and people didn't know about it. But there's also a lot of good things you can do. And if you scope that up front and frankly even contract based on that, and you put in the right guardrails around aggregation and de-identification and different ways that you feel good about that match your culture and your company, and then a lot of time communicate and then even maybe share the data with many of your employees, it turns into an incredibly empowering thing. We've just countless anecdotes. It often starts as a diagnostic that's anonymized and very high level, but it often very quickly moves to, now that we learned, like, what do the top performing salespeople do differently, let's share that out to every employee on a regular basis. People love that. Right? Now
they get more comfortable as you go further along the process with letting their data be a little bit more open.
So you got to establish trust, you got to roll it out in the right way, you got to have a lot of communications that go with it. But ultimately, people feel data is empowering, they can do their job better, and they can get home earlier. So
it's good.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time, but let me just close with asking one last question. Are there any specific things that you've learned that you did badly that you wish you'd done better the first time around, that you would do differently the next time around, or things that you felt you just nailed that in terms of getting this process up and running to be able to analyze your data at this volume in this way and come up with useful, actionable findings?
I mean, there's always learnings, okay? I mean, I will never say that everything we do, oh, that was perfect. We can't do it better next time. You know, what I'm happy about is the fact that we're making this incremental progress. And one of the things that I think that we haven't always done so well at Microsoft is we wait until everything is just fully baked and everything is you know, completely validated and everyone is 100% bought in before we start talking about it. And we start, and we didn't do this, okay, in this particular project. We really started just dribbling out these insights and really getting these in the hands of HR to get their reactions, okay? And that's something that I'm really proud that we were able to do, and also that we had the backing of the HR organization where they felt like, yep, we're behind you, and we believe that this is the wave of the future.
Yeah, I guess one last thing. I mean, I think a big learning for us has been that this needs to be positioned as a journey, right? There's not, you can get immediate insight, but that does not translate to immediate transformed culture and a better company, right? That's like a 5-year journey, and this has to become something that becomes baked into the way that every part of the system is operationalized. So I think for a while we had some disappointed people 2 months in that were like, well, this was really cool, but now what? Well, now is the hard work. Now is the how to roll it out, how to actually encourage people to change. So positioned correctly, it can really work. But
yeah, that's wonderful. Well, thank you very much for sharing your insights with us so openly. We appreciate it. Thank you.